Welcome, welcome, everyone. We are so extremely excited and happy to have you all joining us today. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning into our Toxic Tour this fall of 2022. I am your tour guide, Kaitlyn Joshua from Earthworks. We've got a great lineup of local guides as we travel across the country, looking at how big Wall Street institutions like Bank of America and Morgan Stanley are bankrolling fossil fuels and creating sacrifice zones from Appalachia to the Gulf Coast and all the way to Vietnam. So what do we mean when we say sacrifice zones? And that word has been used a lot this season, and I love hearing it. Sacrifice zones are created when public policies and corporate investment decisions cluster polluting industrial activities in certain neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods historically are where low-income folks and communities of color live who are disproportionately suffer the impact. They get sick, their local weather sources get contaminated, their property values plummet. Their local economic base crumbles, and this creates a vicious cycle where politicians feel they have to continue sacrificing health and environmental quality in order to attract jobs and investment. Today on this Toxic Tour, we are here to stop Wall Street from bankrolling sacrifice zones. So in addition to our awesome speakers, get ready to sign and circulate petitions, make calls to CEOs, and take action. We have a great set of folks and local tour guides for you today, including Sharon Lavigne, founder of Rise St. James, who will talk about Formosa Plastics' plans to build a massive 14 facility petrochemical complex in St. James Parish in Cancel Alley. We also have with us Nancy Bowie from the Vietnamese American Heritage Foundation, who has been working with communities in Vietnam, fighting to hold Formosa Plastics accountable for one of the biggest industrial disasters in that country. Next, we will head to Ohio with our local tour guide, Ben Hunkler from Ohio River Valley Institute, who will tell us about the Dow's Bottom Cracker plant in Belmont County, Ohio, yet another proposed petrochemicals plant. Finally, we'll be joined by the awesome Naomi Yoder from Healthy Gulf, one of the lead groups fighting New Fortress Energy, which is planning a floating liquefied fracked gas export facility offshore in the Gulf Coast of Mexico. But before starting on our tour, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Chan from Friends of the Earth, who will give us a little background about why we are targeting Wall Street for their role in bankrolling sacrifice zones.
Thanks so much, Kaitlyn. It is such an honor to be with all of you, amazing group of activists today. And so before setting off on our tour, I wanted to just briefly lay out some of the context about Wall Street's role in creating sacrifice zones and what we can do to disrupt them. So here's a little history. In the 1930s, there was a government agency called the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which gave banks insurance to make mortgages. And this agency created maps of different neighborhoods, just like this in New Orleans. And they had a 4-color ranking system to help banks identify which areas were worthy of getting home loans. Now, some neighborhoods, which were shaded in green, were considered the good areas to lend to. And so banks ended up focusing their mortgage lending there. But then there were other neighborhoods which were shaded red, the lowest rank, due to, and I'm quoting here, the infiltration of foreign-born Negro or lower grade population. Yeah. So banks avoided making home loans in those neighborhoods, or when they did, they charged really high interest rates. Now, this practice was called redlining, and over 50 years, it created really highly segregated areas with poor immigrant Black and brown people clustered in these redlined areas. And then during those same decades, city zoning officials, along with corporations, began co-locating and concentrating polluting activities, such as heavy industry, in the same neighborhoods. And so this creation of sacrifice zones was deliberate, and banks have had a long and significant role in it. So now let's add another piece of the story, which brings in the fossil fuel industry, the source of so much of the pollution in sacrifice zones. Today, we have a fossil fuel industry that, thanks to activists like you, is actually on the defense. But there are two things that are giving the fracked gas industry a shot in the arm these days. The first is plastics. So when you extract gas, you bring up not only the gas itself, but a bunch of byproducts, including ethane. And companies have all this extra ethane on their hands. They're trying to build petrochemical plants to convert ethane into plastics. And it's their way of creating a major new source of profit. The second thing pumping up the fracked gas industry is the war in Ukraine. Now, as everyone knows, countries are trying to defund Putin's war machine by boycotting Russian gas. And companies here in the United States want to be that replacement source of gas. And so they're quickly building infrastructure to liquefy and export our natural gas. So that's LNG for short. And so we've got two big things really revving up the fracked gas industry right now, right? But one of the biggest barriers getting in the way to both build-outs is money, because both petrochemical plants and LNG export infrastructure, it's hugely expensive. And this is what we mean when we say that building new LNG terminals will lock us into decades of fossil fuel dependence. It's not just that the infrastructure will be there. It's that the companies who built it will owe money for so long that the only way they're going to be able to pay it off is to ensure that fracked gas continues flowing for 20 years. And it's the 20 years of debt that locks us into fossil fuels, not the infrastructure itself. It's kind of like going to law school and taking on a ton of student loans and then having to work for a big, nasty corporate law firm for the next 15 years. It's not the law degree that locks people in, it's the loans. So it's the same thing with plastics and LNG. No loans, no lock-in. And this is the good news, and this is where we come in. It's the price tag on these projects is one of the weakest links in this chain from a campaigning perspective. And so that means almost every company that wants to build out these petrochemical or LNG projects is unable to do it on its own. They need to raise a lot of money, and they need Wall Street banks. The thing is that the banks don't necessarily need them back, not if it's a bad financial deal and not if it's worth a hit to their reputation and image. So that's what we are all here to do in this next hour, is to call these banks out.
Thanks so much, Michelle, for that important background. With that, we're excited to introduce our first stop on the Toxic Tour, which takes us to St. James, Louisiana, for a textbook case of environmental racism. Formosa Plastics is proposing, as y'all know, to build a $12 billion petrochemicals complex in St. James Parish. This is a predominantly Black community in a well-known sacrifice zone, also known as Cancer Alley, that is already overburdened with pollution. With us today is Ms. Sharon Lavigne of Rise St. James, which has been leading the fight against the Formosa Plastics Sunshine Project. Rise has won a few big victories, including getting the Army Corps of Engineers to require a full environmental impact statement, and most recently, a judge threw out the company's state permits. And now the company has to go back to the drawing board. There have been fantastic victories along the way, but the fight is not over yet. And Ms. Sharon is here to tell us about that. And so I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. I'm glad to be here today. My name is Sharon Lavigne. I would like to quote a statement from Dr. Martin Luther King. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. And that's a true statement. My name is Sharon Lavigne. I'm from a small country town along the Mississippi River between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, often known as Cancer Alley. Growing up, we lived off the land, and I'm a retired special education teacher of 38 years and have spent a lifetime working to improve my community. Can you imagine waking up to the sounds of large industrial cranes, and there is nothing you can do about it? That happens often in St. James. That has been the fate of many residents in the sugar parishes, often known as Cancer Alley. In 2018, we committed and took a position to save our community. We found Rise St. James, a faith-based grassroots nonprofit organization fighting for clean air and water, and stopping the expansion of petrochemical industries in St. James Parish. We hosted the first meeting at my home. We had about 10 individuals, and my oldest daughter was my secretary at that time. We specifically want to protect our families and our homes from Formosa Plastics. Formosa Plastics seeks to build a massive $9.4 billion plastic plant known as the Sunshine Project. The facility would comprise of 14 separate plants spread over 2,400 acres of land and would release massive amounts of toxic emission, cancer-causing chemicals, and greenhouse gases into historically disadvantaged communities like St. James, 5th District, and 4th District. In the late summer of 2021, Rise St. James and the Stop Formosa Coalition received word that the Army Corps of Engineers would be carrying out an environmental impact study on the Formosa Plastic Sunshine Project. What a win for the folks fighting the project in St. James. And we know that the impact study would take a few years to complete, thus giving us more time to strategize and focus on other tactics that would end the project. Throughout the last couple of years, the No Formosa Finance Coalition has been working hard, sending letters to banks and insurers across the globe, asking them to defund, denounce, and divest from the Sunshine Project. We have successfully gotten commitments from several European banks and are making strides toward getting hard pledges from the Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Chase Bank. This program tonight is part of the many tactics we have assembled to stop the financial security of the Sunshine Project. Together with Stop the Money Pipeline, Defund Formosa, and partner like Break Free from Plastic, and are able to amplify this work. All right, the court Formosa decision. 2 weeks ago, Louisiana's 19th Judicial District Court reversed the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, which is LDEQ, decision to issue air permits that Formosa Plastic needs to build its proposed petrochemical complex in St. James Parish. Yep, victory. The decision throws out the permits and sends Formosa Plastic back to the drawing board. The permits would have allowed Formosa Plastic to emit over 800 tons of toxic pollution into the air, accelerating environmental racism and harming the health of St. James, predominantly Black residents in a region known as Cancer Alley. Despite all the loss, devastation, and disregard, we are committed to rebuild resilient communities. We imagine eco-friendly rebuilds, and here's what we need help with. We need help with public health and local government infrastructure. We need help with reinforce the importance of democracy in local government. We need climate change adaptation. We need solar energy in public and emergency spaces. We need to protect our cultural and national heritage. In conclusion, we only seek to do God's work. If that activism, environmental justice are courageous, we are only trying to protect our communities. The work is not easy and is nonstop, but we are fortunate to have mutual aid and help from others. We appreciate everyone's support. Thank you for the honor of being here this evening. And to love our community is to find ways to heal our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sharon, for that amazing inspirational background context on Rise St. James. And we are excited to help you win, and that's why we're all on the call tonight. The story with Formosa is not over yet, as Ms. Sharon reiterated. Next on our tour, we are going all the way to Vietnam, where we will meet by our local guide, Nancy Bui of the Vietnamese American Heritage Foundation. Nancy and other Vietnamese activists have been tirelessly and fearlessly fighting to hold Formosa Plastics accountable for a horrible industrial accident that impacted thousands of fisherfolk in 2016. I present to y'all Miss Nancy Bui.
Thank you, Kaitlyn, for your very beautiful introduction. And last August, I and my swimming crew have a very good stop at St. James. I stopped at the church and we saw the community there. And Sharon, congratulations to your victory. And then that inspired us to work more for the Vietnamese people. Unfortunately, my report not a good news like Sharon, but here's what I have to say for the update on Formosa in Vietnam. As you may know, in April 2016, Formosa Steel Corporation, a subsidiary of Formosa Plastic Group in Vietnam, discharged untreated wastewater directly to the sea, causing an environmental disaster in central Vietnam, involving millions of dead fish washing ashore. The incident not only devastated the economy in coastal city, but also presented a health hazard for the people of Vietnam. As a result, one of the Formosa Housing contracted diver who came into direct contact with the contaminated water died days after examining the underwater discharge pipeline, which ran from the Formosa Housing factory to the sea. The local people who ate the fish experienced drastic shattering the livelihood of the the local people who ate the fish experienced sickness on various levels. A fishing ban was subsequently on the marine life. Many local people become migrant workers in order to support their family at home. Some even took great risks and became the victim of human trafficking. As for those who remain in their hometown, they face extremely difficult time with their life on the brink of collapse. The Vietnamese government has called it the worst ever marine pollution in the history of the nation. Nevertheless, in July 2022, which is this year, the Vietnamese government is suspending the policy to monitor and oversee the Formosa Housing waste treatment that was mandated since the disaster happened. Despite the monitoring mechanism required by the authorities, the data had never been disclosed to the public or local community. 7 years on, thousands of victims still suffer from the impact of the acute environmental disaster. They have not been reasonably compensated and have never been informed about the condition of the local environment and the risk to their health. Why Formosa Housing continue to operate its business as usual, and Formosa Plastic Group, its parent company, has never been held accountable. Now, Taiwan government posed the key barrier to access justice. Formosa offered to pay $500 million for the damage without any official assessment to determine the actual extent of the damage they were responsible for. Furthermore, Formosa made direct payment to the Vietnamese government and not to the victim. they were largely inefficient and in many cases never reached the victim. The victim went to local court to file a lawsuit. However, the petition was denied based on what the court deemed insufficient evidence. The victim who tried to appeal was stopped and severely beaten. Many were arrested and imprisoned. Due to the use of violence and threat of imprisonment, the victim could not seek justice in Vietnam court and tried to seek due compensation in Taiwan, where Formosa is based. With the assistance of the environmental and human rights organizations in Taiwan, Vietnam, the US, France, Canada, and Australia, and elsewhere, victims of the Formosa Hating marine disaster filed the lawsuit against Formosa Plastic Group and its partner investor for the harm caused by pollution in Taipei, Taiwan in June 2019. Two Taiwanese lawyers went to Vietnam secretly and met with the victim in February 2019 and were entrusted with the power of attorney signed by the plaintiff to seek justice on behalf of them in Taiwan court. The local Catholic churches collect more POA from the victim and send the document to Taiwan. There are 7,875 plaintiffs in the litigation against Formosa Plastic as of today. On October 18, 2020, the Taiwan Supreme Court overturned a decision made at the lower court concerning Taiwan jurisdiction over the Formosa case. On April 9, 2021, the High Court of Taiwan recognized the jurisdiction of Taiwan court over the case, and over 13 board members and shareholders based in Taiwan, including the international conglomerate. The Formosa Plastic Group and Taiwan's largest steel company, China Steel Corporation. At a request from Formosa attorney in May 2020, Supreme Court required the plaintiff authenticate their power of attorney, which allow individuals to authorize other people to represent or act on their behalf. This decision was deemed legitimate by the Supreme Court for a small number of Vietnamese plaintiffs who live in Taiwan. Thus, they were allowed to continue with the lawsuit against 13 Taiwan-based defendants, including the parent company, Formosa Plastic Corporation, but not against the foreign-based defendants, such as Formosa USA, Formosa Hating. However, most of the plaintiffs who live in Vietnam found themselves excluded from the case before the Taiwan court, because to get the POA authenticated to sue Formosa is almost impossible to fulfill. We urge the Taiwan government to lower or remove legal barriers for foreign plaintiffs in transnational litigation and ensure access to justice. This lawsuit cannot be treated as a normal lawsuit due to the serious human rights violation that concern worldwide advocacy organizations. We urge all banks to stop providing funds to business that profit from destroying the environment and people's lives. It is important to put people over profits, not profit over people. Thank you all for listening and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nancy, for that powerful testimony. Formosa Plastics is known as a serial environmental offender, leaving destruction in their wake. That's why we can't let the company continue with their plans to build their mega project in Louisiana, but we can still stop it. this project doesn't have to has to have all of its permits yet and still needs to raise money, and which is another reason why we're on the call tonight. A lot of it has to be raised, and this is where all of us come in. Michelle, please tell us our first target for tonight as we walk through a series of actions for the next several minutes.
Sure. Thanks, Kaitlyn. We don't know how this project will be funded, but we do know that with a $12 billion price tag, it's going to be expensive. And Formosa Plastics has not lined up the money yet. So for the last year, we've been pressuring Bank of America, and they've been listening. Bank of America even came down to Louisiana to meet with Ms. Sharon and to check out the situation. So we're definitely on their radar. But now tonight, we are turning our sights to JP Chase. They are the biggest US funder of plastic polymer production, which is what Formosa Plastics wants to build. And JP Chase is also one of the biggest financiers of the plastic supply chain writ large. So they're another potential backer of this project. And so to walk us through our first action, I'm going to turn it over to Gary Watson of Rise St. James.
Good evening. For our first action, we will be sending personal emails to Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Chase, and Marissa Buchanan, the Vice President of Sustainable Finance. You can find their emails and suggested text in the chat. Let's take a few minutes to open up our emails and send these messages. In the meantime, we will put on some music, and when you're done, feel free to give us a shout out in the chat. We'll be resuming with our tour in a few minutes, so don't go anywhere.
All right, y'all, I received a few messages about folks having trouble copying from the chat. And so we are going to get that fixed. In the meantime, I'm going to keep us rolling just for the sake of time. We want to honor everyone's time this evening. But I do want to thank the folks that were able to do the action. Thank you so much for calling out JP and Chase and urging them to stop bankrolling sacrifice zones. I myself closed my account last year at Chase and it felt really good. And so we are going to keep doing actions this evening, but our next stop on the Toxic Tour will be Dallas Bottom, Ohio, which is the proposed site of another petrochemical plant that y'all may have heard of, an ethane cracker that will take byproducts from fracked gas and turn them into tiny plastic beads that will then be used for things like beverage bottles, plastics packaging, and more. And so I am going to introduce our next tour guide, Ben Hunkler of Ohio River Valley Institute, who will tell us more.
Thanks for the time, Kaitlyn, and good evening, everyone. Really appreciate you having me here tonight. As Kaitlyn mentioned, my name is Ben Hunkler, and I am currently the communications lead for the Ohio River Valley Institute. And we are an Appalachian think tank working to promote shared prosperity, clean energy, and equitable civic structures. But back in the day before ORV, I was an organizer with Concerned Ohio River Residents, or CORE, a community group organizing against fracking and petrochemical development in Belmont County, Ohio. CORE's main target was and continues to be the ethane cracker that's proposed for construction in Dilly's Bottom, right along the Ohio River. Similar to the Formosa plant, the proposed PTTG plant poses a huge threat to the health, safety, and well-being of nearby residents and communities throughout the Ohio River Valley. If it's constructed, the cracker itself would spew hundreds of tons of harmful pollutants into the air every year, including volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, and potential carcinogens like benzene and ethyl chloride. And these compounds are nasty stuff. They would pose serious threats to human health. They could cause or worsen asthma, respiratory illnesses, heart conditions, cancer, and all kinds of serious health problems. And these airborne pollutants pose a particularly dangerous threat in Dilly's Bottom, which is susceptible to frequent air inversions, like the one pictured on one of these slides here. Yeah, right here, exactly. So this happens when a layer of warm air from the hills settles atop cool air in the valley, essentially trapping and concentrating all of these hazardous air pollutants near ground level, near schools, hospitals, places of work, residences, right where we're breathing. And of course, the environmental and public health threats posed by the PTTG facility extend far beyond Dilly's Bottom. Emissions from the plant could contaminate the Ohio River, which is a source of drinking water for 5 million people. And constructing the plant would also significantly increase demand for local fracked gas, likely spurring even more drilling across our already inundated region. This would mean more fracking wells, more noxious compressor stations, more methane emissions, more brine trucks, more pipelines, more risk of leaks and blowouts, and more transport and injection of radioactive fracking waste. Our region is already a sacrifice zone for the fossil fuel industry. We pay a human toll for the fracking development that pervades the Ohio Valley, for the profits the fossil fuel companies are able to extract from our resources and from our communities. And building this ethane cracker would make that sacrifice even more dire. But as I'm sure many of you on this call know, the industry is pretty slick. They know how to message, how to deceive, how to misconstrue facts and mislead the public. For PTTG, it was the age-old jobs versus environment framing that really got to us. Backers of the Dilly's Bottom project have tried for years to cover up the facility's threats with these grand, inflated assertions about the economic impacts of petrochemical growth. Since the project was first announced, both industry and Belmont County electeds have crowed about the hundreds of direct and thousands of indirect jobs that the plant would allegedly bring to our communities. And we're talking here about coal and gas communities that have suffered from generations of resource extraction, corporate exploitation, and economic disinvestment. These are communities that are in need of an economic turnaround. The darling phrase from everyone from the governor of Ohio to county commissioners to US senators to PTTG executives is game changer, which you'll see here on this kind of cluttered slide that I put together. They'd say PTTG is a game changer. Oh, petrochemicals will be a game changer. These folks swore up and down that the plant would change the economic game in the county and in the region, ushering in a new era of growth and prosperity. And this made for some pretty uphill organizing. Folks were understandably desperate for a game change and were thrilled about the massive investment that was coming to our economically struggling region. The jobs argument has been a thorn in the side of our community organizers seemingly forever. But is it really true that the petrochemical industry means jobs for impacted communities? The answer is likely no, according to employment and income data. So back in October of last year, my current organization, the Ohio River Valley Institute, published this report, which you'll see here on the left, that found that the development of ethane cracker projects like PTTGs is actually not a strong driver of economic activity in Appalachia, which runs completely contrary to industry claims. We looked closely at federal economic data in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, where Shell is nearly finished building a $6 billion ethane cracker that would look a lot like PTTGs. Our research found that since the Shell plant was first announced in 2012, Beaver County has seen a declining population, zero reduction in poverty, zero growth in business, and zero growth in employment, even when you factor in all of the temporary construction workers that are working to build the plant. Data showed us that reality has actually been a far cry from the promises of thousands of jobs that have been dangled before our region for years. So all in all, history shows that developing ethane cracker plants like PTTGs won't turn around our local and regional economies. If the plant is ever constructed, not only will it threaten our community's health and safety, it's also not likely to generate much economic growth, and that's a lose-lose situation for our communities. The story of the Dilly's Bottom cracker and of the Appalachian petrochemical renaissance more broadly is a story of false promises. The industry has strung our communities along for years with unfounded claims that the Dilly's Bottom ethane cracker project would A, include safeguards to ensure nearby communities wouldn't be harmed, B, create an avalanche of job growth that would transform the local economy, and C, even happen in the first place. Today, we still don't know if the plant will ever be built. The project has been in limbo for more than 13 months. And after a years-long series of mishaps, reevaluations, lapsed permits, and missed deadlines, PTTG placed the project on infinite delay last August, citing a need for more financial support. And as Michelle outlined earlier, it's in part a product of the market forces that have hampered the Appalachian petrochemical industry for years and slashed the PTTG plant's projected profit margins well below investment targets. And that's according to research from the Ohio River Valley Institute and the Institute for Economic and Financial Analysis. In other words, the plant just won't be able to make enough money to justify the cost of building it. At this point, the prospect of PTTG finding more financial support is unlikely. The market is still tanking and investors have largely fled Appalachian petrochemical projects. The Dilly's Bottom plant has already lost 2 financial partners due to economic concerns, and nobody wants to throw in on a money-losing scheme. So that's where we stand today. Thanks to a poor economic outlook and the tireless efforts of community leaders and concerned residents, momentum around the PTTG plant is dying out. But the fight isn't over. Our communities are still in harm's way, and we can't rest until the Dilly's Bottom project is officially buried. That means now, today, this evening, is the perfect time to press investors to abandon this plant for good and to demand an end to Wall Street's systematic bankrolling of sacrifice zones across the globe. Again, thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your solidarity with impacted communities the world over. Back to you, Kaitlyn.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was such an amazing testimony. And I also learned it is Dilly's Bottom, Ohio. And so my Louisiana Southern screwing up of words, and I now know it's Dilly's Bottom. So thank you so much again, Ben. And we're excited to throw down with y'all in Ohio. This project is on shaky ground, especially when it comes to money. And that means that pressuring banks can be strategic. So Michelle, can you tell us a little bit more about how we be strategic in that process?
Absolutely. As Ben said, this project is on its back foot. It is the perfect time to pressure now. The company hasn't lined up the funding yet, and it has lost investors already. We don't know which banks may be waiting in the wings, trying to wait for things to get a little bit better. But we can look at who the company has turned to recently to raise money. So for example, just 6 months ago, the company sold $1 billion worth of bonds using an international group of banks, including Citigroup and Bank of America here in the United States. And last year, the company took out a loan of 800 million euros from another group of banks. And guess which bank PTT relied on for that deal? Again, Bank of America. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary to walk us through our second action.
All right, thanks again, Michelle. And for our second action, we're going to ask everyone to take your phones out because we're going to be leaving a message for Bank of America CEO, Brian Moynihan. You can find the number on the screen. You can find the number on the screen as well as a suggested script. We'll be playing some music for a couple minutes again while you call the number. And when you're done, feel free to give us a shout out in the chat.
All right, so I'm guessing everyone has made their calls at this point. So we are going to head down south to Gulf South, that is. The Gulf is already an oil and gas sacrifice zone, and in part because of the war in Ukraine, industry is estimating that some $42 billion a year from now to the end of next year may be invested to build plants to liquefy gas and export it abroad. One of these projects is the New Fortress floating LNG project. And here to tell us about it is our next local guide, Naomi Yoder of Healthy Golf. Let's give it up for Naomi.
Thanks so much, Kaitlyn. Thank you for being here. And I am here to tell you today, to talk with you about the New Fortress floating LNG terminal. So let's go to the next slide, please. So New Fortress Energy, I want to talk a little bit about LNG and then also about New Fortress, the proposal, and then the company specifically. This is just a very, I think, dangerous company. So I want to tell you a little bit about their track record and why this project is a very bad idea. So next slide, please. So first, I want to just do a brief overview of LNG and FLNG. So LNG is liquefied natural gas, or I like to say liquefied fossil gas. There's nothing natural that we need to say about it. So LNG, it's liquefied gas, which means that it's essentially frozen. It's frozen gas that once reduced to this low temperature, becomes a liquid. When that happens, the gas is also reduced in size, in volume. So it's essentially a more efficient way to transport large volumes of gas than as compared to like if you were to transport raw gas in a tanker. So that's the justification that we have from the industry. They're saying, well, this is a much better way to transport gas, and we don't have pipelines across the ocean. So another justification from the industry is that, gas is clean, or a cleaner fuel, which is also just false advertising. Gas, fracked gas, fossil gas is a fossil fuel. So there's nothing clean about it. Anyway, so I can talk more about that, but let's get on to this particular project. So also let me just mention that LNG then, because of this liquefaction process and supercooling, the whole process requires very expensive specialized equipment. So not only does it require all the extraction wells and pipelines and everything, but then the liquefaction terminals, vessels that are specialized, plus regasification terminals. So a lot of infrastructure. Next slide, please. Okay, so an FLNG then is a floating LNG export terminal. And the idea here is that the industry says it can, it can serve LNG onto a ship and load that vessel with less disruption essentially to the port. So LNG tankers are very deep draft and need a deep port. So this is one of the ideas of an FLNG. It's essentially just an offshore LNG export terminal. The gas is piped underwater to the terminal, and then it's liquefied on site. So next slide, please. Okay, so New Fortress, Louisiana FLNG is proposed about 16 miles southwest of Grand Isle. That's in the southeast part of Louisiana. And the proposal is to essentially reuse equipment. So jackup rigs, which are used for drilling, vessels that are used for other things. So all of that specialized equipment I was telling you about is required for safety reasons. So New Fortress is proposing basically to not do that. They're saying, well, we can just reuse all of these other items that are both aging and not specifically designed to hold pressurized gas. So that's a terrible idea. It's a safety nightmare waiting to happen. The New Fortress Energy states that this method will be faster, and they use the justification for faster than a traditional LNG terminal. And they say that the justification for this is the war in the Ukraine and the need to supply Europe with energy, which is also just a false advertising, since they already have contracts with Asia for their gas. Next slide, please. So safety is one of the biggest issues here. The gases that are stored on site, and in addition to the methane, there are other refrigerants and gases that are stored in large quantities and are highly explosive. So all of the gases stored are highly explosive. And recently, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, or BSEE, found extensive safety concerns in its cursory review of the New Fortress Energy application. So some of these risks you can read about on the right, but basically, if BSEE says that something is wrong, then we should listen. It's a terrible idea. Next slide, please. So one other thing I wanted to mention is that their track record, New Fortress Energy has a regasification terminal in Puerto Rico, and they tried to skirt the regulations by flying under the radar. And just this summer, a DC Circuit Court found that that was not okay. So they had been trying to get away without having to do environmental reviews of that project, and the court ordered them to go and cease operations until they do so. I think I'm out of time, so why don't we just advance the next slides? I think that might be it. Yeah, I wanted to say something about Wes Edens, but that's okay. He's also, yeah, we can go ahead. Go ahead. And then this is just a map of all of the LNGs in the Gulf of Mexico that are proposed or operating. Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you, Naomi, and you're welcome to take more time if you want to talk about Wes Edens. Thank you so much for everything you've shared thus far, and for leading this fight. A New Fortress needs to provide the government with more info for the environmental review process, and while this slows things down a bit, it doesn't stop or block it, so it's not time to let up. As mentioned earlier, there may be a $42 billion going to, there may be $42 billion going to build LNG export facilities in the US, but where some folks might see this as an inevitability, we see it as a campaign opportunity. And so Michelle's going to walk us through how we can support what Naomi's doing in the Gulf South.
That's right. So as far as New Fortress goes, just earlier this year, they started gearing up big time by increasing their line of credit. They really want to expand. And what first started out as a $200 million line of credit from Morgan Stanley ended up as a $315 million revolving line of credit with 5 banks. So here's Morgan Stanley not only providing the lion's share of the money, but they're also getting all their banker friends to ante up and to back New Fortress as well. So Gary, can you walk us through our third and final action?
Yes, and for our third action, we're going to put some pressure on Morgan Stanley. In the chat, you will see a petition to Morgan Stanley and other banks to tell them not to finance New Fortress and other LNG exports. Please click the link to add your name. And when you're done, please make sure to share it on social. Meet you back here in just a few minutes.
So we are gonna start bringing our program to the close. And thank y'all so much for spending this evening with us. We are so grateful for your attention, your commitment, your effort. Together in this last hour, we have taken hundreds of actions amongst all of us, from petitions to emails and phone calls. And we're gonna follow that up with a follow-up email so that you can also do that in your spare time if you are not able to do it in this moment. As we bring this toxic tour to a close, I want to invite y'all to keep in touch with us. Please make sure to follow Rise St. James, Ohio River Valley Institute, and Healthy Gulf on social. Rise is at Rise St. James, ORVI is at Ohio River Valley Institute, and Healthy Gulf is at Healthy Gulf. And anybody else that participated tonight, we will make sure to send their logo and their information as well. Finally, I want to mention that from now until the end of October, activists around the country under the banner Blame Wall Street are organizing actions and protests aimed at Wall Street banks to highlight their role in the climate crisis and environmental destruction. You can also go to blamewallstreet.org to find an action near you or organize one yourself. I know us at the No Formosa Finance Space, we will support finance campaigns throughout the country with our friends at Stop the Money Pipeline and Break Free from Plastics and so on and so forth. So please stay tuned to our emails for more ways to plug in. With that, I would like to extend a big thank you to all of you for joining this toxic tour tonight, and good night to everyone.